Millions of people are victimized every year by a system that's supposed to protect them. A lot of these agencies, the police department, Department of Health and Human Services, they're always at each other's throats trying to get funding. Sometimes it seems like they're working together. Most of the time, though, they're not. The best interest of your children isn't there. They'll take children from a poor family and try to force that family to adopt their children out, basically to give up their parental rights because they're broke. And most of them ended up broke trying to jump through government hoops over things so trivial, things that you guys do every day. Becoming homeless, I mean, that's a major issue in America. That's the number one reason for women losing their children: domestic abuse. They turn in their abuser, they can't pay the rent, they end up homeless, and then well, you can't be homeless with children or you're a bad parent. So they take your children away. And they badmouth you in the courtroom talking about how you put your children at risk. Well, I can honestly say that most of the best parents I know don't live in houses. They're homeless. There's a guy named Will. I knew him for a lot of years. Actually, two guys named Will with very similar stories. One of them, he was 18 and his girlfriend was 17 and she was pregnant. And the police did everything they could to prevent him from going to court. And then they did everything they could to prevent his girlfriend from going to court. Her parents were allowed to speak on her own behalf. Her parents were allowed to say this guy was a terrible excuse for a human being. Now, the first Will, he was homeless every year of his daughter growing up. He lived in his car and he went to work every day and he paid his child support and he paid extra so that those children's mother would have a roof over her head so those kids wouldn't end up in the system. When I say kids, I do mean kids because she moved on while he was locked up for something that wasn't illegal or immoral. So she had more kids, and Will took care of these kids, even though they weren't his. And he took care of the kid that was his as well. When, well, I guess it depends on which Will we're talking about. One of the Wills, his daughter recently turned 18. I guess it was a couple of years ago, actually, now. His daughter turned 18. She told him she didn't want to have anything to do with him because he hadn't had anything to do with her life all growing up. That's not true. He lived homeless so that she could live, well, the lifestyle that she wanted to live, with having YouTube, having internet, having a roof over her head, going to school, having friends there, having nice clothes. Will paid for all of that. There was a 3-month period that he always talks about. 3 months where he was locked up for, well, he got busted for camping in city limits. His car had been towed. He didn't have enough to get it out. And it ended up being a big old fiasco with the Boulder Police Department. He ended up serving 3 months in jail. And when he got out of jail, he went right back to what he'd been doing before, paying for everything. Now, the woman that he had a kid with, she got into drugs and she couldn't quit. But she was there and he wasn't. So he gets to be the bad guy in his daughter's eyes. Meanwhile, he was able to set up a fund starting when she was 6 months old to get her into college. His daughter is now going to college. Doesn't even occur to her that her mother's not the one that paid for it. The state's not the one that paid for it. Will is the one that paid for it. You guys want to victimize people who have less than you? Obviously, you know that you're being biased because you're doing it. You're victimizing the same people. That means that you know who it's acceptable socially to victimize and who it's not. I fight for these parents and these kids because I don't have kids. I don't have parents. My mom, she could care less about me. She's shown that pretty much the majority of my life. There was a lot of things that she said maliciously just because she wanted to be mean. And I'm used to that out of her. I'm used to it out of my dad, too. I know both of these people, so I'm luckier than most. But also, is it better to have a parent who isn't there or a parent who's abusive and always assumes the worst in you? Because, see, people didn't victimize me for things I did, they victimized me by their assumptions. Like for me, when I had that issue there in Virginia, that issue was over my entire support work network falling apart before I even got there. For all of my money being spent over people assuming the worst in me and treating me like trash over it, throwing me away like I'd never done anything for them. Those people all came back into my life one by one, each one of them wanting to assert their control and their dominance. Because they have very little control over their lives, they're dependent upon others. Miss Jerry is dependent upon her daughter for a place to live. She is dependent upon her ability to find a boyfriend, find a place to live. Lana is dependent upon her daughter to have a place to live, and her daughter is dependent upon Lana for an income and a place to live. For me, I don't have those things. For me, if I want to get some help from my mother, I might as well just eat a bullet. Help from my father, well, he doesn't care what's help and what isn't. It's what's in his head is how it is, and that's the way it's going to be. The problem is that it's cost me more than I've gotten out of it. Like for me, if he'd have been able to help me last year, been willing to even talk to me last year, there's a lot of stuff that could have happened, a lot of positive things that could have happened. I could have fought this. But he didn't care, not until I challenged his manhood on the internet. That's pretty pathetic, isn't it? A grown man having to go through that. Meanwhile, there's actual decent parents like Will who get treated like they're the worst parent on earth by their children. Now, like I said, there's two Wills that are in similar situations. One of them killed himself. Um, there's a father who kills himself every, I believe what the statistic was every 23 minutes. A father kills himself because he can't see his kids. We've got a system that's built on monetizing your children's lives, drugging them up, giving them medications at, well, at rates that are dangerous for most adults. I was one of those kids. I posted up a couple of stories from some other people who have been through similar stuff. the parents' side, not the children's side. I can't tell you the parents' side, but these people can. I can tell you the children's side because I grew up in it. I know what it's like to have parents that won't stay off the drugs. My dad, he likes to tell me that cocaine was never involved, that he was falsely accused. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I wasn't there. I was just a little kid. My dad ended up in that trouble when I was 4 years old, three years old. And from the age of 3 to 4, I lived with a couple of different family members who didn't know nothing about raising kids. My Aunt Mary never had kids. She never had to raise them. She likes to tell the story about how we were stuck in Denver traffic and she had a Mountain Dew bottle and I needed to pee, so she let me pee in that Mountain Dew bottle. That's about the only story that she can remember about me being that age. For my dad, being right is the most important thing. He doesn't care if he's actually right, he cares about winning the argument. My stepmom, she just lets him win. She doesn't want to argue, she just wants to go about her life. She wants to wash the dishes and wash the clothes and be Susie Homemaker and not have any issues. But also, that's her familiarity. That's my dad's familiarity. Everything that's ever gone wrong in my life, my dad has been a dickhead about. You chose this. You chose this. Same thing that Brandon Jepson does. He makes excuses why I deserve it. Brandon Jepson likes to pretend like I'm some sort of a terrible excuse for a person because I didn't get the start that he did. He wants to put his 2 cents in on what's going on in my life right now, but then he wants to complain because I don't know anything about what's gone on in his life in the last 6 years. There's a reason that I don't know what's gone on in his life in the last 6 years because he stopped being my friend. We had an argument over how the Boulder police treat the homeless, and Brandon wanted to make excuses. And this is after I broke my vehicle. I was trying to get a hold of him and let him know how things were going, and it was weird for me because here's a guy who, in chapel, not very many people accepted me, but Brandon and his sister did. And I've been through some real traumatic experiences with him. I mean, I was living with him when Brooke died. That was an ex-girlfriend of his. They'd just gotten back together 2 days prior, and then she got into an accident, and she died, and her daughter survived it, but she didn't, and that tore Brandon up. I've taken lumps on more than one occasion for Brandon, and I'm not going to feel bad for that because Brandon was in the right morally. But when my vehicle broke down, he told me that I deserved it, that I wanted it, that I chose it. I didn't. I didn't choose for a rock to fly up there and get stuck in between my starter and prevent it from disengaging from the flywheel. It'd be nice if that had been my decision. It's just the way the cookie crumbles, I suppose. But when his vehicle broke down up there in Torrington, Wyoming, his dad drove from Chapel, Nebraska to Torrington, Wyoming with a flatbed to pick up Brandon's vehicle and drive it all the way back to Chapel and fix it. Brandon says, well, I earned that. I paid him back. Well, it's nice that you got to pay him back. It's even nicer that you had a dad who was willing to do that. For me, my dad just wanted to throw whatever token he could at me to pretend like he did something. He He made no effort to understand. Every time I tried to speak, he wanted to speak over me. Now this lady Anna Moomin, she she covers this topic. She's not the only one. Most of the people that I've been looking at their streams, a lot of people with Asperger's, and yes, I'm aware that they changed that diagnosis and now it's mild autism. The fact is, it's not mild. It's not. These are the most intelligent people on earth. And you want to classify them among the dumbest, pretend like they don't know what's going on. Meanwhile, we are all painfully aware of what's going on. We see the world for what it really is. We're your analytical minds. Well, a lot of you guys try to pretend like the way that you live is so much better, and it's not. Being good to people is not complicated. Trying to understand others is not complicated. And we are constantly bombarded with the you need to imagine how they think. You need to imagine how it looks to other people. And the fact is, we do. We have to. We have to be consciously aware of how you guys, you neurotypicals, want to view things. Because your views, your points of view, are what you punish us over. And then you tell us that we chose it. Like that guy with the lazy eye, one of his eyes goes way over here. And you guys make fun of him because he doesn't look right. He must be a child molester because he doesn't look right. He must be a psycho because he doesn't look right. He's not worth dating because he doesn't look right. No matter how nice and decent a person he is, it doesn't matter because you've already made that judgment based on how he looks. And then you've got your little crap there. And this Anna Moomin lady talks about how they keep on pushing off the ADHD thing instead of focusing on the real issue. The real issue is that people aren't educated on autism. They see a movie and they think everybody's like that. Like the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise. Not all autistic people are like that. Tourette syndrome, I have that as well. And I see how Hollywood depicts people with Tourette syndrome. They're always cursing. I don't curse because of that. See, only 30% of Tourette syndrome cases have vocal tics. And only 5% of those people have the part where you curse. And I met one guy who couldn't help but drop the N-bomb. It falls out of his mouth. And he does have that vocal tic, and he does get beat up for it. He doesn't even like the word. But he must have wanted it, needed it, chose it, or deserved it because he's different. Well, for him, I can understand how it is that he gets assaulted. But for most of us, it's that you guys aren't educated. You saw something on Hollywood and you think that because Hollywood says so, then it must be right. That movie Deuce Bigelow, Male Gigolo, there's a lady in there who curses. And it's just acting. It's not somebody who's actually got Tourette syndrome. So for me, they take something that I have to deal with, something that I have to deal with people assaulting me over because they don't understand. And Hollywood takes this and makes a joke out of it. And don't get me wrong, I think it was actually pretty funny. I do. But it's also unrealistic. I do this with my eyes. And a lot of times when I'm making a video, I watch my eyes in the video to make sure that I'm not doing that. But also, you turn a blind eye because People who are different should not exist. We're not as human as anyone else. We don't deserve the same rights as another person. We don't deserve the Constitution. Meanwhile, what you're not paying attention to is that when they take the Constitution from me, they take it away from all of us. What was done to me in these groups, this harassment, this slander, this bullying, I didn't bully anybody until I absolutely had to defend myself. And I bullied those who bullied me. Natalie was afraid to be honest with her mother. That's not my fault, and I shouldn't have been punished for it. That telephone that I got that used to be Natalie's, there's a reason that she wasn't using it anymore, and that reason is because she had the same issues with it that I was. These people, Alicia, for example, she only had good intentions for the most part. But her good intentions screwed me over because she didn't want to understand the situation. I mean, when she wanted me to take that phone, I was having a panic attack over taking that phone because I knew it would happen. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a 100% chance that that's what was going to happen, but the fact is, she said that she'd show me how to use it, and she didn't. And I knew that since it was in her name, if there was any issues, I wasn't going to be able to pay my bill, and I wouldn't be able to talk to or connect with any of the people that I care about. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I had to try to come up with money to pay people back for helping me to get out of Virginia. And, I set it up so that I wouldn't have a panic attack. Just everything fell apart. And they didn't understand. They didn't even try to understand. Instead, they played head games with me and played head games with me and did everything they could to, prevent me from having an honest day in court. When I finally was allowed a day in court, I still didn't know how to do any of this technical stuff. And I didn't even know I had a day in court. Not that it would have mattered. I didn't have the money to go anyway. I was still trying to find a lawyer through Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. I'm going to post that video up for you too. Somebody has to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Now, Jeff Ritter is so cowardly about his involvement, not wanting legal repercussions, that he had his boss call me back. And you can hear his boss stuttering and stammering because he already knows what the call's about. The same thing happened with Jay Lynn from Broomfield. She was supposed to be a victim's rights advocate. She refused to be for me. She failed to recognize that I was a victim. I was a victim of harassment, slander, and assault. See, that's the thing about slander. When your slander results in someone else being physically assaulted, it's time for you to come forward instead of hiding like a coward. What Natalie's family has done since her death, a few of them took part in before she was dead, but most of them jumped on afterwards to bully me, just assuming that I was wrong. I was painted and slandered in the media and by the police and by the Bollingers on multiple occasions, hundreds of occasions. Not once was I ever allowed to speak up for myself in court, not even once. All of my disability money went to going to over 20 court dates. Over 20 court dates. And for each one of those court dates, I had a public pretender that didn't meet with me and an investigator that didn't meet with me. And these court dates are all in places where I am being victimized. And they want me to keep on going back and keep on going back and keep on going back. This is not acceptable. For somebody with a family, it's tough enough. For somebody without any family support whatsoever, it's even worse. And that's why it's so easy to victimize me. because nobody actually cares. Nobody cares about homeless rights until they're homeless. And by then, of course, it's too late. Between getting an education on autism and just assuming that I'm a psycho, you chose to assume that I am a psycho. Meanwhile, I spent my life saving lives, not taking them. The hell that I was put through after I hurt my back made me want to die. That hasn't changed. But this fight is bigger than me. There are a lot of kids out there who need a hero like me. There are a lot of kids out there who are in the system being victimized because there's not somebody like me to speak up for them. Meanwhile, they do everything in their power to prevent people like me from getting a position of power where I can actually help those people. When I designed my castle, I designed it as something that we could work on over time. This isn't some buying Windsor Castle sort of thing. No, this is starting off with the bare earth and earning your way up to having yourself a garden. Everything that I worked for my entire life stolen from me repeatedly because I didn't have anyone in my corner. People can just gang up on me and take whatever they want. The cops ignore it. Obviously, they're going to ignore it. They have too much to gain from ignoring it. I want to see every single Bollinger, every adult Bollinger in prison for the things that they did to myself and to Natalie. That includes Alicia. She deserves prison. It don't matter how pretty she is. She'll be somebody's property in prison, I guarantee it.